my name's Edward Aviard. I'm a member of the Yorkshire Dialect Society. I'm going to talk a bit about the involvement of J.R.R. Tolkien, famous for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, in the work of Yorkshire dialect. Now, the University of Leeds is a centre for dialect study, and not just of Yorkshire dialects. In its Brotherton library, I took out a book on the Huddersfield dialect that was published in 1928 by a local teacher named Walter Haig, who taught English at the Huddersfield Technical College, which still exists. So I was turning over a few pages of this, and I found an inscription from Harold Orton, famous leader of a survey of English dialects, and turning over a few more pages, I found a preface by the famous J.R. Tolkien. Now, Tolkien was a professor at the University of Leeds. Before coming to Leeds, he'd studied at Oxford under Joseph Wright, the founder of the Yorkshire Dialect Society and the compiler of the English Dialect Dictionary. Though Tolkien must surely have been aware of Joseph Wright's work, so when he was writing this preface to Haig's book in 1928, he must have been aware of this great volume of dialectology. I'm going to talk about some points in Tolkien's essay that stand out that are relevant to dialect writers today. So he talked about the geographical isolation of the Huddersfield area, which might sound strange now, but he was writing before any of the motorways were built. Its situation in the Pennines made it an isolated place until fairly recently. And this kept the Huddersfield area insulated from many of the changes in the English language that had swept the country. Huddersfield also lies close to a point where Yorkshire, Derbyshire, Cheshire and Lancashire all intersect. And there are some of its features which occur in those neighbouring counties, but not in much of the rest of Yorkshire. So for example, in this book by Walter Haig, he always writes this vowel in words like time, as in for time, which he writes T-A-U-M with a sort of line above the A and U. And that way of saying it as Tarm, you can hear it in Derbyshire, Cheshire, Lancashire around there, but really in Yorkshire it's generally just sort of around the Huddersfield that exists. So Walter Haig had his own way of writing dialect words, as many have had before him. For example, William Stock Banks had his own way of writing the Wakefield dialect in 1865. More than 100 years later, Arnold Kellett had his own orthography, and some members of the Yorkshire Dialect Society today are promoting their own ways of writing dialect words, such as our member Ian Stevenson's standard Yorkshire spelling. So going back to Tolkien, so he talks about how linguistic change is inevitable, and he has a good choice of words here. He talks about the modern word of bicycle, which now seems just a standard everyday word for us, but the bicycle had only been invented in the 19th century, so it was a relatively recent word, and you have to think, well, if we've accepted bicycle as a new word, why not accept all the other words that have come since? And Tolkien talks about how understanding how new words come in from standard English often explains how changes in dialect occurred in the past. Tolkien also applauded Walter Haig for his approach of including all the words that are in use in the Huddersfield area, even if he'd not found an etymology going back to Old English or Old Norse for all of them, because he was aware that a lot of linguists in the past had excluded words because they'd mistakenly thought that they were just recent inventions. And now this point of view reminds me of this argument we're still having today about slang and whether slang is different from dialect or not. So it seems that we're still having this argument in the days of Tolkien, even though the words are different. So Tolkien says that he uses a contrast between two words, saying that one has more affection than the other. So he says he uses the word demic, which means a disease of farm animals and potatoes, and then the word kincost for the whooping cough, and says about how etymologists like the word kincost but not demic. I was thinking, well, two words we don't hear much anymore, but it was interesting that linguists had this feeling of, for one word but not the other, more affection for what they saw as an older word. And I was thinking, we still have these arguments now. I mean, say for example about the glottal stop, where if people hear forgetting, like getting or getting, and they argue, is that really dialect or is that modern slang? And interesting how these arguments carry on. And some of the words in Walter Haig's book were used in Tolkien's novels. I mean, for example, the hero Bilbo Baggins had a surname that means a meal, particularly a brown bag lunch, bagging. Some of the place names in Tolkien's work also show the influence of dialects, such as the word bree for the brow of a hill, or staddle for a timber stand. The word nuncle for an uncle, that's in Tolkien's work, and that occurs in a fairly small area around Huddersfield. So when Hollywood made the cinematic adaptations of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit should really have all been speaking in Huddersfield dialect.